So now, I would like to hand over the stage to Professor Yuhyunsok, who will moderate this session. Professor Yuhyunsok is currently at the Department of Political Science and International Relations, Kyunghee University, Seoul, Korea. He served many advisory positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Unification, and Prime Minister's Office. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Yuhyunsok with a big round of applause.
Thank you for the warm introduction. Good morning, everyone. My name is Hyunsok Yu, Professor of International Relations in Kyunghee University, Seoul, Korea. I'm also the moderator of this session titled Leadership and Partnership in the Quest for Peace. It is my great honor and a privilege to be a part of this very important session at the Jeju Peace Forum. In 1997, ICBL, International Campaign to Ban Landmine, and its co-founder Jody Williams were jointly awarded Nobel Peace Prize. 20 years later, ICAN, International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, became the Nobel Peace Prize laureate for its instrumental role to draft the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So the achievement of these two organizations kind of symbolize the success of global civil society in promoting the peace, human security, and disarmament. However, now we are living in times when states use sheer military force to achieve their territorial aspiration and strategic interests. Moreover, the strategic competition between two superpowers seems to increase the possibility of military conflict substantially. So in this very harsh and confrontational environment, the role of NGOs and private actors in promoting peace, human security, and disarmament would be very limited and would be getting smaller and smaller. So in this context, I think this is the right time to revisit the success stories of these organizations, including ICBL, CMC, and ICAN, and to draw some lessons from their experiences. So in this regard, I think this session is very timely and also very important for both scholars and the practitioners. Today we have three very prominent presenters representing civil society organization. We have Professor Laurent Gochel to my left, and Mr. Hector Guerra, he's the director of ICBL CMC, and Dr. Maria Villarreal, a member of International Steering Group of ICAN. And as a discussant, we have Dr. Dagmar Schmidt. Dr. Schmidt is also the ambassador of the Switzerland to Republic of Korea currently. So before we start, let me briefly explain the format and time management of this session. Presenters will have maximum 10 minutes each. Okay. After that, Ambassador Schmidt will give her thought on three presentations. And then I will invite the three presenters again and give a chance to respond to Dr. Schmidt's comment. If you all are very punctual, then we will have about 25 minutes, I hope. Then I will proceed with the session in a roundtable format. I'm going to throw a couple of questions on the table, and then we'll expect a very lively discussion among the session participants. After that, if time permits, I will collect questions and comments from the audience. Is all clear? Okay, thank you very much. Now, time is a very scarce commodity here, so without further ado, I will invite Professor Laurent Gochel for his presentation. Laurent, please.
Well, thank you very much, to the moderator, and welcome to all of you for this first morning session. And I see here technique is perfect. I see my thumb is running, so I won't get lost in further introductory remarks, but I'll move on with my presentation. I just have the question regarding the way I will be able to switch the slides. Yeah. Thank you very much. So, you have heard in the introduction that my two panel colleagues, they will be speaking about very specific campaigns and roles of non-governmental organization and civil society. In order not to duplicate what they will be saying, what I wouldn't be able anyway, I thought I would kind of set the stage about the role of NGOs and civil societies in peace and in peace-building processes. And for this, I will be starting with a couple of pictures. And so, to get everyone awake, because I think the morning session is the second worst session you can have after the digestion session, after the lunch break, I am presenting this picture. So, apart from the fact that I think it looks rather nice, the idea behind the picture is to visualize a peace process. It is a picture which can also be used to visualize chaos. And the ones of you who are familiar with chaos theory know that you can also try to get hold of chaos, to find certain regularities, even though there are regularities about non-regularities. And when we think about one or the other conflict or peace process related to it in the actual world, I think you will understand what I mean. What's important for me in this picture is that, well, it seems a little bit difficult to put in clear dimensions or logics into what you see, but there is some diffuse light in the background of the picture. So there seems to be a direction about where to go, but the way how to go there doesn't look all too clear, and who will be participating in which capacity during this process is also not too clear. And still, one would need to remain confident and positive about the direction to engage in, and that's also a bit the way I conceive peace, the vision of peace, and peace processes. But now the topic of the panel is not about chaos, peace, visions, and optimism. It's about the role of different actors, and particularly state actors as compared to civil society actors or NGO actors. And to set the stage, as I mentioned, well, there are different ways one can engage into this discussion. And do you see here these two emojis? Well, they set the stage in a positive way. I mean, one can think about the role of state actors and non-state actors in a very harmonious and positive way, like civil society and official actors always wanted to complement each other in a constructive way. And of course, I also have an example for this. This is a meeting of a directors meeting actually of EPLO, which is the European Peacebuilding Liaison Office, an umbrella organization of about 50 European non-governmental organizations. A meeting in Brussels. If you look carefully at it, you might even see me in the center. This is not the objective of this picture. However, it means to represent a harmonious picture about the cooperation of NGOs and state and international actors. You see also the former head of the External Action Service and Deputy Chief of the European Commission, Ms. Mogherini, and many civil society organizations at a meeting discussing the world and different possible roles of international organizations, state and non-state actors. But we can also have roles of civil society actors which at least raise more question marks about their sense, their meaning, and what they could bring to international peace and peace processes. And here you see an example in the form of a picture, of a painting actually. It is a painting of an Afghan NGOs called Art Lords. We, meaning Swiss Peace, the organization I'm heading, besides being a professor at the University of Basel, have been cooperating with the Art Lords. They've been active in Kabul until August 2021, when they also had to leave. And they were producing paintings on separation walls, security walls in the midst of the city of Kabul. So you remember the international communities, mainly states and some international actors were very present in Afghanistan for about 20 years. You may also remember the pictures when they left rather rapidly, August a year ago. And they had their principles of engagement, their objectives, their security needs. And this organization, this civil society organizations, Art Lords, they really wanted to show also the limits of this engagement, painting on separation and security walls. They did these paintings together with members of civil society, of the public, walking on the streets in Kabul. And without entering into too many details, what you see here in this painting, it's the role of education, it's the role of the youth, it's particularly also about the role of girls and the right to education in Kabul. And well, we now know how things developed since August 2021 in Kabul. But then we can also have problems in the relation with civil society and state actors, when these actors don't see things at all the same way. And this is a picture now out of the country I'm coming from, Switzerland. These are demonstrators in the street, linked to an earlier event of the World Economic Forum annual meeting, the so-called WEF, taking place in Davos, but it was not possible to demonstrate in Davos, so the citizens opposing this way of seeing globalization, but also of seeing world peace, because the World Economic Forum has always also claimed that it was contributing to promoting interconnections between the different parts of the world and the way forward in order to achieve more stability through this increased interdependence. So looking at these different examples and leaving the pictures, one can say that actually there are different positions possible about the role of civil society actors on the global stage. You can see civil society actors, NGOs, as positive, good actors contributing through their knowledge, their networks, to solving problems of global relevance in the interest of the collectivity. On the other side, you can see NGOs as lacking legitimacy, as acting mainly in their own interest and as mistaking their own interest for the ones of the society, and in the end, taking benefit from a particular constellation in order to advance their own cause. So as always, reality is somewhere in the middle, or there is a mixed picture about these things. And this slide, I mean, I could be talking about 1 hour. On this slide, I have 33 seconds left. So it's more to set the stage for what will be coming afterwards. One has to look at the functions of NGOs, their role as experts, monitors, advocacy organizations you will be hearing more about in a few minutes, but also in implementing different policy fields. There are examples on early warning, transitional justice, disarmament, mediation. I'll be happy to talk more about if you wish later on. Of course, it depends on the context in which they are operating, on the degree of democracies in the respective states, and this all will lead to different types of relationships with state actors being possibly leadership, symbiosis, or being seen as significant others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurent, for very colorful, at the same time very insightful presentation. You know, the 10 minutes is a kind of guideline, so you can a little bit go over 10 minutes, okay, 1 or 2 minutes. So it's guideline. And next, Mr. Hector Guerra, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 안녕하세요. 만나세요. 반갑습니다. I tried, but it's really very happy to be here. Thank you very much to the organizers of this panel, and thanks to my esteemed colleagues for their participation in this event in the framework of such an important conference, such as the Jeju Forum. I'm going to speak less about my own organization, but about lessons learned about from the perspective of ICBL-CMC to the contribution of civil society to peace. Disarmament has played an important role in peace, in the construction of peace, in the development of peace for a century. And we are at a point where speaking of disarmament is not enough. We are at a point when we, based especially on the contributions, on the developments over the past generation, we refer to humanitarian disarmament. Disarmament based on international humanitarian law, human rights imperatives. And this has been the case to a large extent because of the major contribution of civil society movements. We've been proud members of that movement as ICBL-CMC, but we're not the only ones. And in a few minutes, you will listen to my friend and colleague, Maria Eugenia, who will be speaking about ICANN and its role in nuclear disarmament. But ICBL has been around for 30 years. Actually, this year marks our 30th anniversary. And what I'm going to say about humanitarian disarmament and the relevance of civil society in setting the scene, in developing the international agenda for humanitarian disarmament is from the perspective of ICBL-CMC, based on the experience and the lessons learned. Civil society has been playing a key role, not just once a treaty comes into being, but actually in developing the ideas that eventually turn into treaties. This was the case with respect to landmines, cluster munitions, but also in other aspects of humanitarian disarmament, which deals with the eradication of certain types of weapons, but also on non-proliferation and control. So in that sense, we've had other important actors, such as the Control Arms Alliance, in working hand in hand with like-minded states to bring into existence the Arms Trade Treaty. ICANN certainly, in the case of the recently adopted the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the International Network on Explosive Weapons with respect to the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, and so on and so forth. So there are different such initiatives which have developed over the past generation, basically since the end of the Cold War, which presented lots of challenges, but most importantly, many important opportunities. It has been an interesting moment in international relations, which allowed for some of these movements to come to fruition and working hand in hand with like-minded states, international actors such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, UN agencies, and many more in bringing the ideas to multilateral fora and turning them into legally binding instruments. Having a treaty in itself is just the beginning, because then we need to ensure their proper implementation, the proper universalization. So to this day, ICBL-CMC continues working for the promotion of the universalization and implementation of the landmark treaties, the mine ban, the treaty, and the Convention on Cluster Munitions. So the work continues. Now, the moment in history that came into being following the end of the Cold War somehow is showing signs, big signs of change, which are accelerating. In the current context, we see that there are even open attacks on multilateralism, the development of international law. We see challenges to the rule of law at the international level, financial uncertainty, and on top of that, as we all have experienced over the past years, a terrible pandemic, and we see more and more the effects of climate change, and conflicts such as the one in Ukraine, which have major geopolitical consequences. But let's not forget this. This is not the only conflict that is taking place as we speak. There are many other. But then also, and this is something that we have been mindful in the area of humanitarian disarmament, that most armed violence takes place outside armed conflicts. And there are many countries all over the world where there are major situations of armed violence costing lives and livelihoods of entire communities all over the world. So that is something that for which action has been required and is still needed. As a humanitarian disarmament movement, we are subject to the conditions, we've been subject to the conditions which allowed us to do the work hand in hand with or with partners very successfully over 3 decades, but then we need to read properly the signs and adapt to the current challenges for us to remain real, efficient, effective. I think that there are some elements that have been important which are still relevant to this day. One is that in our networks, in our work, we have had major leadership from local organizations from around the world, especially from countries affected, directly affected by armed violence, by armed conflicts, including survivors' networks of those individuals and communities who have been directly hit by armed violence, by the use of landmines, cluster munitions, explosive remnants of war, and so on. Research and the dissemination of findings has been very important as well. And ourselves, for many, many years, have been doing research through the Landmine and Cluster Munition Monitor. There are some copies of our most recent issue of the Landmine Monitor outside for those of you who are interested. Otherwise, there are still 2 days, a day and a half ahead of us. I'll be around. If you're interested to learn more about ICBL-CMC, I'll be happy to chat with you and provide more information. So, meaningful participation of local, national organizations, research On top of that, we have seen the relevance of having a united advocacy approach, a united message in the diversity of our voices, which has been very strong, has had major results over the years. And then working closely with like-minded states, with international organizations, with the academia, that has been a factor for the sustainability of our work over the years. What's ahead? Well, things are changing. We need to adapt. I think that in our area of grassroots action in humanitarian disarmament, I think there has been, in general terms, good adaptation to the new challenges. But this is a moment when we need to look back, draw lessons from the work that has been done, from our mistakes, from the opportunities that we have had, from the successes, but then we have to be forward-looking and see what are the new possibilities in view of political, economic, environmental, public health restrictions. I think that there are many opportunities ahead. I think there is a clear role still for civil society in the area of humanitarian disarmament, but I believe that this is clearly not the only area where civil society, especially civil society networks, civil society organizations at the global level have a major role to play in international fora in helping to develop agendas. I'll stop right here, but I look forward to the questions and contributions from the rest of the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hector. You have raised many important issues. I don't summarize the content of the presentation for the sake of time, but concepts like adaptation to new challenges or the rise of local organization leadership, that drew my attention. I want to discuss it later if time permits. After that, Dr. Maria Villarreal from ICANN. Maria?
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, I would like to express my immense gratitude with Dr. Yuhyunsok, with Ki-Yoon Ryu and Han In-taek for this opportunity, for this gift, for the possibility to be with you here in this wonderful country. So I'm going to start saying, to refer what the Nobel Prizes have said about the elimination of nuclear weapons. We are going to start saying that Nobel Prize laureate Martin Luther King Jr. said when accepting his prize in 1964, the nuclear weapons are both genocidal and suicidal. It's a very important phrase, this one. The second one was Nobel laureate William Faulkner said when accepting his prize in 1950, only by being the voice of humanity can we defeat fear, can we help humanity endure. The third one, Nobel laureate international physicians for the prevention of nuclear weapons when accepting their prize in 1985. We physicians protest the outrage of holding the entire world hostage. We protest the moral obscenity that each of us is being continuously targeted for extinction. And our Nobel Prize. Nobel Prize laureate for international campaign to ban nuclear weapons said when accepting our prize in 2017. ICANN's duty is to be the voice of humanity and of international humanitarian law and of international, to speak up on behalf of civilians, Giving voice to the humanitarian perspective is how we will create the end of fear, the end of Daniel, and ultimately the end of nuclear weapons. Well, Dalai Lama also said, I can imagine a world without nuclear weapons, and I support ICAN. ICAN is the international campaign to stigmatize, prohibit, and eliminate nuclear weapons. ICAN is a broad, inclusive campaign focused on mobilizing civil society around the world to support the specific objective of prohibiting and eliminating nuclear weapons. ICAN originated in Australia and was formally launched in Austria in April 2007. Since our founding, we have worked to build a powerful global groundswell of public support for the abolition of nuclear weapons by engaging a diverse range of groups and working alongside the Red Cross and like-minded governments. We have helped reshape the debate on nuclear weapons and generate momentum towards elimination. ICAN works from local peace and human rights groups and global federations to survivors of the U.S. atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and of nuclear tests. The survivors, the Bakushas, were at the beginning of the story. They had been waiting for the ban of nuclear weapons for 72 years. We represent ICAN, who refuse to accept nuclear weapons as a fixture in our world. Those who refuse to have their faiths bound up in a few lines of launch code. Ours is the only reality that is possible. The alternative is unthinkable. Okay, as I have said, we are a coalition of 468 non-governmental organizations in more than 100 countries, having campaigns in every continent in the world. We're going to talk about the milestones. Okay, we start saying that at the review of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 2010, all nations expressed their deep concern at the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons. Building on the outcomes of the humanitarian conferences, ICAN campaigned for the establishment of an special UN working group to examine a specific proposal for advancing nuclear disarmament. This body met 3 times in Geneva in 2016 and issued a report recommending the negotiation of a nuclear ban treaty. Our campaign then successfully lobbied for the UN General Assembly to adopt a landmark resolution in December 2016 to launch negotiation on a legally binding instrument to prohibit nuclear weapons. Throughout the negotiation process, I can work alongside governments to achieve the strongest, most effective treaty possible. Around 2/3 of the world's nations voting in favor of adopting a ban treaty. Another milestone, and very important, was in 2017 when we have received the Nobel Prize. The committee stated for its work to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and for its groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons as the reason for selecting ICANN for this award. Another milestone, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is ratified by the 50 states, triggering its entry into force on 22 January 2021. The first meeting of state parties to the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was held in Vienna in 2022. So now we are going to see the moment of the adoption of the treaty. The PNW, as we call the treaty, was adopted at the United Nations by a vote of 122 countries in July 2017. The treaty, which is so important that I want to underline, prohibits the development, testing, production, manufacture, acquisition, possession, stockpiling, transfer, use, and threaten use of nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. The ICANN calls the TPNW a landmark international agreement that outlaws categorically the worst weapons of mass destruction and establishes a pathway to their elimination. Okay, we arrived to 2017, as we have said, with the Nobel Peace Prize. ICANN was awarded. The committee stated for its work to draw attention to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of any use of nuclear weapons and for its groundbreaking efforts to achieve a treaty-based prohibition of such weapons as the reason for selecting ICANN for this award. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is ratified by the 50 states. Its entry in force in 22 January 2021. So after that, we have had our first meeting of state parties to the UN Treaty held in Vienna last June 22. So I would like just to address two questions that always raised in conference, that this one. The first one, why nuclear armed countries refuse to sign the UN approved atomic weapons ban treaty? Why? Well, they say that the TPNW lacked the support of the countries on its control, precisely nuclear bombs. The governments of the United States, Russia, China, the United Kingdom, France, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. The only ones to have the technology for the use of nuclear energy for war purposes did not participate in the negotiation or in the vote on this new international agreement, as they are not signatories to this treaty. These countries are not subject to the regulation established therein. The nuclear powers argue that their arsenals have a deterrent effect on a possible nuclear attack, and say that remain committed to the gradual approach to disarmament set out in the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. So another question that always raised is why does this treaty matter? Is none of the countries with nuclear weapons have joined? Well, the treaty is a powerful normative tool to demonstrate that nuclear weapons are morally unacceptable. It strengthens the legal framework and legal stigma against nuclear weapons. The PNW can put external pressure on nuclear armed states to make further efforts on disarmament. The last one, our commitment. The PNW is the starting point of the pathway for a world free of nuclear weapons. It is a light in the dark time. No matter what obstacles we face, we will keep moving and keep pushing and keep sharing this light with others. This is our passion and commitment for our one precious world to survive. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Maria, for a very passionate presentation. Now, let me invite Ambassador Schmidt for commenting on these three presentations. Unfortunately, you only have 10 minutes.
Thank you
Please.
very much. Thank you very much. I'm much honored to take the floor after this prestigious panel and very happy to be with you here. And I would like to thank Dr. Interkan for having invited me and for the interest he shows in Swiss foreign policy. For over 30 years, the concept of partnership has been a key element of the Swiss government in the quest for international peace. Soon after the end of the Cold War, on October 1st, 1990, it published a white paper that placed cooperation and partnership at the center of security and foreign policy in order to participate in the shaping of a European and international peace order, but without becoming member of a military alliance. The revised Federal Constitution of 1999 stipulated that Switzerland's foreign policy shall in particular assist in the alleviation of need and poverty in the world and promote respect for human rights and democracy, the peaceful coexistence of people, as well as the conservation of natural resources. I will take up the themes of the three panelists to outline shortly what measures Switzerland has taken in the long term to strengthen its partnership in civil peace building, humanitarian disarmament, and how to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons. There is no sustainable peace without civil society engagement, and Switzerland is convinced on the UN approach of sustaining peace. I will focus, however, on the instruments Swiss foreign policy developed since the 90s to ensure the partnership with civil society and international community in the quest for peace. Professor Laurent Goetschel, Director of Swiss Peace, heads today the institution that gave already in the 1980s significant impetus to the peace and conflict research in Switzerland. The Swiss Peace Foundation was started in 1988 by committed civil society groups and subsequently supported by government funding. Its first head of the governing board was a former president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Alexander Hay. In 1996, the Swiss government decided eventually to submit to Parliament a 4-year credit that created a medium-term perspective to enhance resources for civil peace building in cooperation with non-state actors. Since 2003, a law, the Federal Act on Measures for Civil Peace Building and Strengthening of Human Rights, stipulates that the Swiss Parliament approves such a framework credit every 4 years, approximately $50 to $60 million per year, in addition to Switzerland's international development cooperation, humanitarian aid, or military peace building. The latter relatively restrictive and modest compared to other states. Since then, however, Switzerland has continuously channeled additional financial and human resources into strengthening human rights and enforcing international humanitarian law, building expertise in political processes such as mediation, ceasefire negotiations, dealing with the past or combating impunity, and in diplomatic initiatives for the protection of civilians in armed conflicts and of refugees, and for humanitarian disarmament, as well as in the promotion of democratic processes to prevent armed conflicts and violent extremism. The development of partnerships with non-state actors and civil society has been explicitly provided for by Parliament in the legislative and credit framework. Partnership in civil peace building is broadly defined by Switzerland. It certainly also includes cooperation with the international state community, with international governmental and non-governmental organizations, academia and the world of science, the private sector, foundations, and other institutions. The Federal Peace Building Act established a pool of experts for civil peace building, enabling Switzerland to deploy about 200 experts annually to UN, OSCE, or EU missions to promote peace and human rights. Some of them are also integrated on a mandate basis into Switzerland's bilateral diplomatic missions, contributing to conflict prevention and conflict resolution by building up local partnerships when there is demand and need. In Switzerland, International Geneva plays a key role for fostering partnership. To strengthen its framework, a transparent and predictable host state policy covering not only international intergovernmental organizations, but also international non-governmental organizations has been developed. The Partnership for Sustainable Peace Building was also promoted by the 3 Geneva Centers for Security Policy, for Humanitarian Demining, and for Security Sector Governance, and which are all located in the Maison de la Paix, the House of Peace, together with the Graduate Institute for International and Development Studies. They are governed by boards of trustees composed of a variety of states from all continents, thus expressing the global partnership approach. The international campaign to ban landmines and cluster munitions and the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, presented by Hector Guerra and Dr. Maria Villarreal, have both their global networks based in Geneva. Their presence is of particular interest to Switzerland and underlines the importance of Geneva as a UN city, capital of peace, humanitarian organizations, humanitarian disarmament, and global center for multilateral diplomacy. Civil society actors, as it was outlined, in particular ICBL CMC, were key for the creation of the Ottawa Convention for an International Total Ban on Anti-Personnel Landmines of 1997 and the Oslo Convention to ban cluster munitions of 2008. Switzerland is an engaged state party of both conventions and still supports the civil society organizations to maintain the momentum in the conventions and to ensure that inertia does not set in. It shares also the goals of ICANN and the objective of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW. Open questions regarding the relationship between the between the TPNW and the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT, were the main reasons why Switzerland has not joined the TPNW right in the aftermath of its conclusion. At the first party conference last June, it participated in the role of an active observer state. It engages for synergies between the two treaties and wishes to explore the compatibility and the complementarity, as both treaties share the same goal of a world free of nuclear weapons. The NPT Review Conference of 2010 expressed a deep concern about the continued risk for humanity to be exposed to the possible use of nuclear weapons and their catastrophic humanitarian consequences that would result from it. Switzerland was very much also engaged in this article. It is hardly conceivable that nuclear weapons could be used in accordance with the principles and rules of international humanitarian law. At the last NPT Review Conference in August in New York, the President of Switzerland, Ignazio Cassis, emphasized in his speech that Russia's unacceptable nuclear threats in the context of its military aggression against Ukraine illustrated the need for a package of measures to reduce nuclear risks. He condemned also the DPRK's continued development of its nuclear weapon programs in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Decisive steps should be taken by all nuclear states towards nuclear disarmament in order to strengthen the NPT and return to the path of arms control and disarmament. I come to an end. As early as the mid-19th century, the founding of the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva, and the codification of international humanitarian law has established a key feature of Swiss foreign policy: to promote the primacy of the rule of law over the rule of force in interstate relations. The engagement for international law and for a rule-based international order is realized in partnership with the international community. Non-state actors play an essential role for advocacy as well as in the promotion of dialogue for conflict prevention and conflict resolutions. To uphold respect for international law, Switzerland has also participated in international non-military coercive measures which were adopted by the UN, the OSCE, or the EU during the last 30 years, and has endorsed also the sanctions in response to Russia's invasion in Ukraine. On June 9, 2022, the UN General Assembly elected Switzerland as a non-permanent member for 2023-24. You will be not surprised of the priorities Switzerland has set for its 2 years mandate: building sustainable peace, promoting the protection of civilians in armed conflict, addressing climate security, and enhancing effectiveness of the work of the Security Council. Partnership with non-state actors is essential also in this context. In partnership with the international community, this all will not be an easy task. But as President Ignazio Cassis stated right after the election, we want to exploit Swiss expertise to work for peace and represent our values in the world, and as a neutral country, to be part of the search for compromise and solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Schmidt, for sharing the role of the Switzerland in promoting the peacemaking. And also, you touched upon very important, kind of my personal inquiry, the comparison between the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and then NPT. So, thank you very much. Now, I'll invite 3 presenters and give them a chance to respond, if you have any response, or the want to add on to your previous presentation? Hector, please.
Thank you. The role of civil society in multilateralism, in helping or contributing to set agendas, working with like-minded states and other international actors, wouldn't be understood without the role of the financial support that many of these governments, such as Switzerland, have provided over the years. I think this is important to mention that partnership entails different levels of collaborations. There are different implications, but this support makes real the possibility of developing global networks, for instance. It is important also to say that this support, at the end of the day, comes from taxpayer money. So it's a contribution from a whole country to the role of these organizations in working for peace, disarmament, human rights, and so on. So that is important to note. But then, as I mentioned during my presentation, one of the major changes that the international community has seen, especially since 2008, is financial uncertainty. From that year, we had a major financial crisis at the global level. This, and then new challenges such as the pandemic, have translated into financial challenges for global civil society organizations, to the extent connected to the availability of resources from the different donor countries around the world. This partnership is not just financial, that is very clear. It goes hand in hand with like-minded approaches to the promotion of the international norms, for instance, against landmines and cluster munitions. But that's indeed something that in the way ahead needs to be seriously considered and revisited. And it goes without saying that in spite of these restrictions, it has been very important to see the ongoing support from countries such as Switzerland, and we're grateful to Switzerland as being one of our major donors that allow us to continue our work. We ourselves, as mentioned earlier, our headquarters is based in international Geneva, but we are a network of organizations from around the world. And during conferences, and thanks through the support from our donors, it has been possible over the years to bring the presence of survivors networks and other members from our network to take and to play an active role during meetings of states parties. This was relevant during negotiations and adoption of the treaties, and it remains relevant to this day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Laurent?
Yeah, thank you. Hector's remark triggered one thought with me, relating to this financial dependency, if I may use the word, of civil society organizations and international NGOs. And I think particularly also in view of changing geopolitical constellations and very different polarities we can also observe at the international stage right now, I think it is important for civil society organizations to also be very transparent about the conditions for functioning. And Hector made this very clear regarding his organization. And I think it is also, I would dare to say, not too difficult for the two organizations which are present now with me on this panel. But there are also very different types of international civil society organizations. And the sources they are getting their funding from also usually tell something about their thematic or political agenda. So for quite some time, possibly for the last 30 years, there was an unspoken, unsaid assumption that civil society was good and emerging bottom up and reflecting the will of the people. And this might be true in regard to the themes they are advocating and engaging for, but it is in most of the cases not true regarding their funding structure. There are specific states or specific international organizations, sometimes also private firms supporting the life of these organizations. And these organizations are, to a certain or sometimes even to a large degree, dependent on these funding sources. Obviously, the broader these funding sources, the better distributed the sources of income, the less dependent they are. If we would imagine for the future to make a wish or develop a vision, I think a place like the Jeju Forum is also the place to do this. You know, what could imagine a UN fund where you don't see anymore exactly who was giving how much, what for civil society organizations, which would then attribute certain funding lines to a selected number of civil society organizations. It doesn't exist yet. I don't know if it will ever exist, but fact is that the opposition to certain civil society organizations, and particularly also to certain themes they are advocating for in so-called illiberal democracies or even non-democratic states, the last line of my last slide, usually also comes from this opposition to the actors who are funding the respective organizations. So, and I'll stop with this, civil society organizations don't just, fall down from the sky to improve the world. They are heavily anchored and dependent in existing power and financial structures. And that's why for an organization like Swiss Peace, but also for other organizations based in Geneva or other, I would call them like-minded states engaging as credibly as possible for the improvement of the world in the sphere of peace building are lucky, because there is some congruence between their funding sources and their objectives, but it is not the case for many other organizations, and that's why I think a panel like this one is very important to also discuss these structural tensions in the field of the interaction between state and non-state actors in the realm of peace building. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. You raised very heavy subject into the discussion. Maria, if you don't mind, let me move on to this roundtable discussion, and then we'll have a chance to speak during the roundtable discussion. The theme of this session is leadership and partnership for the success of civil society organization in the quest for peace. Let me bring up a couple of the discussion points regarding these two themes of the session, the leadership and partnership. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, the role of civil society in current environment, very hostile to each other and then confrontational. The role of the civil society is inevitably be shrinking. Can you share your thoughts on how the civil society can establish or maintain the leadership, or in more simple word, how can you remain relevant under these many challenges? The Hector mentioned many challenges. Also, this funding problem is also always there. It's very fundamental challenges. So under this circumstance, how can civil society organization remain relevant? This is my question to all of you.
I think it is good to see when an organization is victim of its own success. When, given the advance, and I will refer basically to the main type of work that global NGO coalitions in the area of humanitarian disarmament do, which is linked to the adoption, implementation of treaties. So in some instances, some national organizations, especially when they come from countries which have not been directly which have not been directly affected by landmines or cluster munitions, but which do their work out of a sense of duty, of global solidarity. Well, when their countries join a convention, that's pretty much mission accomplished, and then perhaps they don't need to do much work, or they could do it more at the regional level. Over the years, as treaty universalization advances, then the nature of the work of a global network can change as well. So the global campaigning approach may become less fundamental and give way to actual advocacy within the framework of treaty processes. But they remain relevant. Maybe just, I think we have to be careful about not linking just relevance to visibility, because that's not necessarily the case. The relevance continues sometimes in what seem to be behind the scenes work, and not just in conferences. And that's the relevance of International Geneva, that it hosts 4-hour processes, secretariats for year-long work that then becomes more visible when meetings of states parties take place. But there are indeed challenges to relevance, which come in some instances from funding. Some organizations over the years have seen a reduction in their access to international funds, especially when they come mainly from states. And since 2008, we've seen the effects of that financial crisis. We saw it in repurposing of resources for international cooperation over the past 2 years in the context of the pandemic, how that affected clearly the work done by civil society in the framework of humanitarian disarmament. So that affects the possibility of doing perhaps work as much as in the past, or doing things with less resources. But I would say that another factor to consider in looking ahead, in making an assessment of what has been done so far and evolving to adapt to new international conditions, is developing synergies. So humanitarian disarmament is part of a wider international or multilateral agenda in parallel to the work on human rights, right to food, public health, etc., etc. So these synergies have to take place. We have to learn more about what other areas of multilateral work, including the work of civil society, is what's happening there, and developing partnerships. Because one of the big challenges we see nowadays for civil society action is the shrinking of civic space in different countries around the world. But this shrinking of civic space is affecting the different NGOs, the different coalitions. So we need to work closer to meet those challenges. The recognitions of the relevance to advocacy and the funds available for advocacy, that's something else where these synergies can happen. We have a very important framework, such as the SDGs, where we could work more closely with other other grassroots initiatives. So I think that that can help those are factors among many others for the relevance of civil society leadership and partnership in the area of humanitarian disarmament and beyond. Thank you.
I have a question for Roran. Is the funding dependency, as your term, is funding dependency, is it threatening the leadership of civil society vis-a-vis state actors?
Well, I think it has always been threatening to a certain degree, as who pays for something also tends to want to have a say in what is going to happen. But I wouldn't say this is as dramatic as it might seem, because it was always the case. So, I mean, civil society actors, the way we know them today, including the two campaigns present on this panel, they have only emerged because certain states were ready to support them. So, and they were also ready to support them, being fully aware that they wouldn't be able to 100% guide what they would be doing. It would be, like a bet they were engaging with, saying we want to bring forward a certain topic on the international agenda. And we think that these type of actors are well suited to help us achieving this objective. So in this strategy, in this approach, a certain kind of complementarity and synergies is built in. And I think what is really important is that the respective civil society actors also stick to their part of the game, so that they don't become too dependent on a limited number of actors. They should keep their credibility, even under conditions which are getting harsher, as you mentioned. So I think, I mean, a concept which is present in the work organizations like Swiss Peace are engaged with, also in so-called fragile context, is the concept of conflict sensitivity, meaning that organizations should be sensitive to the political tensions which exist in their context, but their context doesn't need to be limited to a geographic understanding of context, like in a particular country or region, but it can also be in a political context linked to a particular policy field, like in the field of nuclear disarmament. I mean, of course, it is very important to engage for the total abolition of nuclear arms, but I know ICANN well enough to know that they are also very sensitive to the difficulties, the contingencies present in this field, and this should continue to also guide their engagement and their campaign, because this in the end also will make them relevant to the states and the other actors supporting them. So in the end, it's a network of different type of actors trying to move through this slightly chaotic picture of getting closer to peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Roran. Let me move to my second question. It's also related to first question. The relationship between state actors and the civil society organization in peace building and humanitarian disarmament and whatnot doesn't seem to be definite. Like the Ottawa Convention case, state actors are the indispensable partner for civil society organization. And we have state actors like Switzerland, very cooperative. But usually state actors are very reluctant to cooperate with civil society, especially in national security related issue areas. So can you tell us the current kind of trend of this state NGO relationship? Is the relationship amicable, more amicable than before, or partnerships more common than before, or opposite direction? I don't know the field, so you can have some sense, how the general trend of a partnership. Maria?
Yes. Since the beginning, we have established with the governments alliances. We have built together strategies, planning strategies together. All the time we are working hand with hand. But not only just with governments, it's important to say, we work with key actors in the countries, such as parliamentarians, for example, mass media, social networks, students, academics, researchers, churches, etc. We work in different levels in the country, not just with governments. That is important to say. On the other hand, listening the conversation before, of course, the NGOs, we are not a non-profit organizations. So we build together with the governments our goals. We try to maintain the momentum. We are complementary with the governments. So it's a work hand by hand. Our experience is that we have been successful because the government trusts us, trusts in our work that we are doing, because we have been successful. So if we depend or not of the government financial, which is not just of the government, we have many resources for many different types of organizations that they are convinced that we have to continue working to prohibit the nuclear weapons.
Thank you. Okay, Ambassador.
Maybe just to say something, what you asked before, how important are still non-state actors also in a geopolitical difficult context. And I cited in my intervention the ICRC. The ICRC was founded in the 19th century, and there was a lot of that was also civil society movement. So it's even when a geopolitical context is difficult, they're even more important. I think because they're based to our global values. We have the values in the UN Charter. So I think in that sense, when there's a complicated geopolitical context, the non-state actors and advocating on the values of our international communities become even more important. Thank you.
Hector? Oh, yeah, go ahead. Roland, yeah.
Oh, I mean, very shortly, I mean, the fact that Ambassador Schmidt and myself are sitting on the same panel shows that also in more complex times, collaboration between, collaboration has a negative stigma. Cooperation between state actors and civil society actors continues to be very relevant, and maybe even more relevant, as was said. And I personally even believe that the fact that engagement for peace is becoming more tricky, maybe also more delicate, even in certain contexts, may also help sharpen the role, the profiles, and the ambitions of actors involved in this field, as compared to the last 30 years, where not everywhere, but in many places, it was like a natural given that certain things would develop into a certain direction and that resources were available and political support. Now then things are changing to a certain extent. It may help these actors and these endeavors to sharpen their goals and the conditions under which they are ready to pursue them.
Thank you. Hector, just 2
Partnership
two
is
minutes.
not monolithic. It's context specific, it's level of engagement specific. So context specific, it's not, one thing is to work states and non-state actors in the context of the UN, the General Assembly, than doing it in processes which take place outside the UN. And I mean the Mine Ban Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions. They were negotiated outside the UN because at that point, conditions did not allow to get the best possible international instrument for the prohibition of landmines and cluster munitions, respectively. So there was a virtuous partnership. That virtuous partnership of like-minded states led to opening processes outside, which provided impressive conditions for NGO engagement over the years. Ourselves, ICBL and CMC, we are two campaigns within the same organization. We have observer status in the coordination committees of both treaties. That is quite unique. At the end of the day, our area of work in the multilateral arena is in a space where ruled by it's a states club, their castle, their rules. We adapt over the years, given the relevance of values. NGOs have found their way more and more in this fora. It hasn't always been easy. We see some other states actually trying to actively block that access. So that adds to the complexity of this relationship, of the relevance of NGOs. But I think that there are important precedents that I would hope will remain so for the years to come, such as the two treaties I have mentioned, which allow for this very constructive, very positive partnership, which has led to important instruments which have helped to save lives, limbs, and livelihoods. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I have to wrap up this session. I think this session bring up many very, very important issues. We touched not deeply enough, but it's our contribution to raise the issue and make people think about it. I want to express sincere appreciation to the host of this session, Jeju Peace Forum, and then also host Jeju Peace Institute. And then I want to thank you, presenters and then discussant, for your contribution. And to the audience, thank you for your attention. I'm sorry about cannot give you a chance to ask a question or comment. Sorry and thank you. This is the end of session. Thank you very much.